Hello and welcome to another AIC video. For as long as I've been using a computer, I've always considered myself to be a PC or Windows computers. My family had an original IBM, I want to say it was a 286 growing up for years that ran DOS. We eventually upgraded to a 386, then I personally had a 486 desktop. And then we had an Athlon, and then from there, when I got into laptops, I had things like this Toshiba Protege and my HP OmniBook. And I'm currently running my 25th anniversary ThinkPad. So I've always kind of been in that Windows world for a lot of reasons, namely familiarity and personal comfort of use. But I've always kind of had some experiences with Macs. Growing up, my cousins, my aunt and uncle would hand down their old Macs when they upgraded, and so my cousins had some all-in-one Macintoshes that we would use HyperCard on to build our own games. We do our own choose your own adventure games on there, which I have great memories of. That was a lot of fun. I also use Macs in school with an Apple II GS. We'd play things like Frogger and Oregon Trail on there. And then when I got into college, we had G3 Macs and G4 Macs that were in the school library. I also use those in some of my design classes, things like that. So I've used Macs throughout my life, but I've never personally owned one. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Namely, for a new computer, they were often out of my price range, especially for the performance. So if I was spending that much money, I usually needed something with a lot more performance, or it's me being the cheap person I am, I'm usually buying something a little bit less expensive, and so they were just too far in my price range. And on the used market, and I love buying things used because you can often get a very good deal on it, they would either be still far too much money for what they were. I could usually get a much higher end PC for the same money, or for similar specs, I could go with a lot cheaper machine if it was a Windows computer. Or they were just completely ratted out and just destroyed. Not much left of the computer anymore. In the last couple of years, however, due to supply chain issues, people working from home, doing school from home, the inventory of used PCs, even new PCs, has gone way down. Just in general, there's fewer companies that are turning over their laptops as quickly as they used to. And so the overall supply of computers on the market has gone down, causing their prices to increase. The other thing is, the last decade or so, Intel CPUs really haven't made much progress up until the last couple of years, with AMD really putting the screws to them. But for nearly a decade, there was very little performance increase from one generation of CPU to the next. What this means is that you could buy a Apple computer. They made a bunch of these with little, very small changes to them, for a very similar price to a Windows PC, and get fairly similar performance for about the same price. And so while you're still not getting quite as good a deal as you could get with a Windows PC, it's a lot more justifiable, or at least easier to swallow price-wise, in buying an older Macintosh. So I went ahead and picked one up, and that's what we have here. So this is the Mac that I bought. It is a 2013 MacBook Air. It has a Core i7 4th gen Intel processor. It has 8 gigs of RAM, and that is soldered, and 128 gig SSD. Now I paid about $200 for this laptop, and as I said, the price for these is much more palatable than it used to be. But for about that same amount of money, about $200 to $225, you could pick up something like this, which is a Lenovo ThinkPad X280, which has an 8th gen Core i5 processor, which is undeniably faster. It still only has the 8 gigs of RAM soldered, so not much of improvement there. However, it does have much faster storage. It has storage that's much easier to upgrade, and a much better screen. And we'll go over that here in a little bit as far as what this laptop has. So it is something to consider with buying a used MacBook or Apple device in general, is you can usually still get a better deal on either for same money you get more performance, or for less money you get similar performance. So that is a consideration when buying an Apple. However, the Apple will still hold its value as long as you keep it in decent shape. It will sell for more than this will after a similar amount of time. So the model on this is A4166. As I said, it has a 4th gen Core i7 processor, which I was kind of surprised to find that a lot of these were actually Core i7s. Obviously, they have a ton of Core i5s. I even saw some Core i3s out there, but surprisingly, a large number of Core i7s. And the price difference between an i7 and an i5 really was not very big at all. That's why I went with the i7, because you get a little bit of a performance boost, about 10% or so in most tasks, without paying much more. It's about a $10 to $20 increase in price. I figured that was worth it. So the first thing that you'll notice on this laptop, since I have it right in front of you, is the screen. It is a little bit of an older screen with a little bit different of a resolution. It's a 1440 by 900 resolution on a 13-inch screen. That's actually a pretty decent resolution. Not as high as, a 1920 by 1080, but you're not suffering with the 1366 by 768, which is what you find on a lot of more budget-oriented systems, which is just a terrible screen. This is a nice middle ground. I'm sure, especially for the time, this laptop is nearly 10 years old at this point. And so you're not giving up a ton of screen for a little bit older of a system. At the time, I'm sure this was a pretty good screen. It is showing its age a little bit, mostly just in the overall quality. I feel like it's a bit overdriven, a little bit brighter than I would want it to be. And it's missing out on some features like a touchscreen. It's not a touchscreen. Not that I love touchscreens, but I'm sure that there are people out there that is a consideration for them, is of something they do want. I know with my kids, their school computers are all touchscreens, and so every time they go to use one of my computers that isn't a touchscreen, they just cover it in fingerprints, because that's what they're used to, that's what they expect. So that is something that I did want to mention. Now, as far as ports go, this is pretty okay, especially for the time. It's pretty decent for ports. We have our MagSafe. We have a USB Type A port here, a headphone microphone jack. On this other side, we do have a Thunderbolt port. Now, this is the 1st gen of Thunderbolt, which is using a display port. That's really all it's good for. On this system, you can plug in other things that use the display port, but really what it was meant for, it was to drive higher resolutions and higher refresh rates on more professional monitors than what other display ports at the time could do. So it's really just kind of a step up display port connection there, which you would then use a Thunderbolt adapter for. I really wish this had a different display out. Mainly I wish it had HDMI. At the time though, HDMI really couldn't do a whole lot higher resolution than 1920 by 1080. And so it really was the better option. It just, for more modern things, I'm really not a dongle person. We have another USB port, so 2 full USB ports, and then the SD card reader here, which is something that a lot of newer laptops is sorely lacking, and something that I do appreciate having on here. My wife will as well. She takes a lot of pictures with her digital camera. She can't always find her cable, and so she likes to be able to pop that SD card out and put it in here, and also to swap out SD cards when she's taking a lot of pictures. So that is definitely something that will be used on this laptop. Overall, for the machine, I am very impressed with its overall physical dimensions, especially for the time. This is very thin and very light. And I know I have it plugged in. That's because I was using it and the battery died on me. and I didn't want to wait for it to charge up. But it's very thin, very light, especially for the time. I remember when the ads for this first came out and they pulled it out of a manila envelope. It was truly mind-blowing. I know a ton of laptops nowadays are super thin and light. I know that is common now. By the time, this really was a game changer in a lot of ways in its design, especially with it being able to have an all-day battery, basically. It was really impressive. Now, as far as using it, like I said about the screen, it is starting to show its age a little bit. The screen, for its time, I'm sure was a fine screen, but it definitely doesn't compare to newer laptops of a similar price range. The trackpad, it's very nice. It's nice and big. I don't feel like I'm using a trackpad from 10 years ago, except for when I go to use some of the touch gestures. It doesn't always recognize all of the ones I expect, especially swiping. And I do have to click more often than I'm used to. Not a bad thing, it just is taking me some getting used to versus some of my newer systems and the available gestures there. One thing about this laptop that I'm surprisingly not very impressed with is the keyboard. I know a lot of people who absolutely love the keyboard on their Apple laptops, rave about them. I do know about the butterfly switches. I worked for a company that had a bunch of those, and they were swapping those suckers out like they were candy. But this isn't a butterfly keyboard. I believe it's a scissor switch or whatever, previous to the butterfly. It is backlit, but it feels surprisingly cheap to me. It feels very similar to laptops I use on $150 to $250 laptops. Not great. Typing speed on it is fine. It just isn't very satisfying. Now, I might be a bit biased in that, in the fact that I do use a 25th anniversary ThinkPad, which is probably one of the best keyboards on a more modern computer, period. But I'm not impressed with this. I'm hoping that it's just because it's a little bit more worn out, being an older system, but I wish it did have a better keyboard. Now, that is real nitpicking. I'm sure most people won't even ever consider that being an issue for them, but for somebody like me who does a lot of typing, that is a sticking point for me on this keyboard. One thing I was also surprised about is the sound quality on this laptop. I always thought Macs as having, or Apple devices as having really good sound quality on them, and I'm not impressed. The speakers on this are actually pretty terrible. They're not firing directly at you. They sound kind of muffled. They get distorted at any kind of volume, higher volume. And so I was less than impressed with the speakers on this. Now, it might just be the age, and I've been spoiled with newer laptops. The speakers on my Lenovo Legion were fantastic for a laptop. Obviously, for a laptop, there is a qualifier in there. There's only so big of a speaker you can put in here, and there's only so much power you can put through them. They're not going to blow away, a set of bookshelf speakers or, wall power speakers. But for a laptop, it was excellent. These are pretty muddy and not great. I'd have to go back and listen to some laptops at the time, but definitely less than impressed with that. Now, as far as overall performance of the computer, it definitely is not the fastest or snappiest thing in the world, being that it is nearly a decade old. However, it's not bad. I never felt like I was held back by the performance of the system. It is completely up to date with the most recent version of, I want to say it's High Sierra or whatever the current version of the OS is on here. So all the modern apps and everything ran as expected. It did feel a touch sluggish sometimes, but that was really in comparison to faster, newer computers. If I'm just using it, I never feel like I'm being penalized by the performance of it. Now, that is in my typical workflow, browsing the web, watching YouTube videos, streaming things on Amazon Prime, things like that. So if you're using it for what I would say 99% of what people use a laptop for, I don't think it would ever be a performance bottleneck. Now, I had somebody ask about gaming on this system. That is not something you're want to buy this computer for. If you're buying this computer for gaming, you're buying the wrong computer, straight up. Mainly because you're not going to have as many options for games on a Mac OS versus Windows. And yes, you can install Windows on here, but then you're installing Windows on a much more expensive hardware when you could just buy a Windows computer that has higher specs for the same money, right? Again, that X280 8th gen Core i5 processor is going to have much better graphics than a 4th gen Core i7. It just is. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is also running DDR3 soldered to the system board. That's running DDR4, so faster memory. So as far as gaming performance goes, I did put Roblox on here and it ran fine. You know, anything like that that's kind of a lower end basic game is going to be fine. If you're going to play solitaire or I forget what it's called, but the farming game on Facebook that was super popular there for a few years. If you're going to do something like that, this is going to run it fine. If you're going into some older vintage games, they're going to run fine on here, but it really is not the purpose of this computer. And if you're going to be gaming, buy something else. And if you want a suggestion, I have tons of videos about it, or ask. I'll definitely give you a suggestion. But it is in this system. I can't recommend it. There's just too many drawbacks for gaming on a Macintosh. So sorry for a little bit of rant mid video, but that is my thoughts, since I know I'm going to be asked that question a bunch. Now, my biggest concern about using this laptop was really OS related. Being that I haven't really used a Mac in quite some time, I have tried to buy a few MacBooks over the years. The last one was a, I forget what it's called, but it was a Core 2 Duo, and it ended up catching on fire. Not the laptop itself, but the charger, which then fried the system board of the computer. So I don't have a ton of experience with modern Macs, but I do have a lot of experience. I have an iPhone, I have an iPad, and so my big concern was coming to the OS, which shouldn't have been a big concern because it's just like the devices I'm already using. It really is the same OS between the different devices. At least it feels very similar. And so when you're going from one device to another, you're really not having to learn a whole new system. And so I think that's something they've done very well here in creating a familiar ecosystem for people who have an iPhone, who have a Macintosh computer, who have an iPad. You know, you kind of have all these devices, and you're familiar. If you've used one, you're familiar with the other, and you can pick it up and get going right away. Your accounts spread across all of them. I'll be honest, kind of what I was hoping Microsoft would do with the Windows Phone. I was a big Windows Phone person. Anyways, unfortunately that did fizzle out. The one frustration I did have with the OS, and this is because I'm coming from a Windows world, I have a copy of Office 2011, and I was going to install it on here because I wanted Office, and it won't run. This computer was made in 2013. That software is from 2011. You would think they should work together, right? And in fact, when this was new, it absolutely would have installed. But with newer versions of the operating system, Apple has killed the ability to install older software. Where on my current desktop running Windows 11, running Office 2003, it doesn't care. It lets me do it. I just hit a button, hit OK, and I'm off to the races. So that is a frustration I did have, because I didn't want to install Office on here, and there's no real good way to put it on here without having to go through buying or paying for Office 365, which is not something I want to do. I don't use it often enough to justify paying that subscription when I already own a copy that should install on here. So that is something to keep in mind if you have older software. And probably one of my biggest complaints currently with Macs is the software availability, and they make you go through the Apple Store. Absolutely, you have to go through the Apple Store for your applications. So if I said I would bought this laptop purely for myself, I would be lying. I bought this as an early Christmas present for my wife. That's why I'm doing this video now, so I can give it to her. She's pretty excited. Unfortunately, she was here when it got delivered. She thought it was something else and opened it up and saw it. So it wasn't much of a surprise for me. But she is super excited for it. She really looks forward to it. My wife is one of those people that technology hates her, and she hates technology, and there's a constant battle there. So she does have her iPhone, she has her iPad, which she loves. So I'm hoping that maybe having a Mac for her would make her life a little bit easier, less fighting between her and her devices. Now, one thing I might be doing for her here pretty soon, this did come with 128 gigs of storage. That's really not enough. Unfortunately, they use a proprietary drive on these. You can get an adapter, but depending on which year the laptop is, they can be pretty finicky to run an NVMe drive. So I'm going to probably do a video on that here in the near to distant future, depending on how quickly my wife fills this drive up and how fast we need to actually upgrade the storage on here. I already have her account on here, and we'll see how that goes. But definitely, if for somebody in your life who maybe isn't as technically savvy as you, who wants something that they might already be familiar with, I think this would be a great option for them. Hopefully it works out well for me and my wife. Now, normally on these computers, when I do a review, very first thing I do is open them up and show people what the hardware looks like on the inside. I didn't do that on this one for a few reasons. Number one, there really isn't a lot to see. The only thing that you can upgrade is that storage, and even then it's not really. I plan on maybe doing a video later on that later, but system memory is soldered, CPU is soldered, wireless module is soldered, everything's just soldered to the system board. And so you're not going to be buying this with any expectation to upgrade it. Even that storage, like I said, very expensive to upgrade it with an Apple drive, and then the third-party adapters, very finicky. So something to keep in mind. If you're buying this, buy it as you expect to use it. Don't buy it with any plans to upgrade. Should you buy this? It really depends on your use case, to be honest. For me personally, this is not something I bought for myself. Like I said, bought it for my wife. I hope that it will be a very good system for her to use. It was a good way for us to test out to see if she does want to switch over to a Mac computer for her daily use without a large investment. Like I said, about $200. Where one of these a new MacBook Air is about $1,000. So pretty big price jump there. And I know that a new one will be obviously a lot faster, have a lot better performance, better screen, things like that. But I don't feel like this comes with any performance penalties to an everyday user. So definitely something worth looking into. Plus, the old one does have the light up logo on the back, which I think looks absolutely fantastic. The new ones don't do that because of their screen style. So definitely something to keep in mind. Anyways, if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, leave those down in the comment section down below. I'll do my best to answer. Hopefully this was insightful to somebody that's looking into this, that's been in the PC world, maybe looking to get into the Mac for the first time. Less scary than I thought it would be. Not that I thought it was very scary. But definitely very interesting as far as an ecosystem goes. So anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you have an amazing day.